All right, let's talk Romeo and Juliet. If you're tackling this for your GCSEs, you know that the theme of power is absolutely huge. So today, we're going to unpack all of that. We'll give you a rock-solid structure for your next essay. Let's dive in.
So this is the big question, right? In this world of, quote, ancient grudges, who's really pulling the strings? You've got this whole city, Verona, that's just like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. Underneath all the street fights and the big speeches, there are all these different forces wrestling for control. So the question is, who actually has the power?
Okay, here's the game plan. We'll kick things off by figuring out what power even means in Verona. Then we'll hit 3 key points: violence, patriarchy, and love. And to wrap it all up, we'll try to answer that big question: who's really in charge here? Think of this as the perfect structure for your essay.
First up, Verona's game of power. Look, before we can analyze anything, we have to define our terms. It's the first rule of writing a killer essay, right? So let's get clear on what we mean by power.
Okay, so what is power in this play? Well, it's not just one simple thing. Think of it as the engine that makes the whole story go. It's the influence, the control, the authority, the dominance. It's all of it. It's what the families are fighting for, what Lord Capulet has over Juliet, what the prince tries to enforce. This is the stuff that creates all that amazing dramatic tension.
All right, let's get into our first big point. This is the most in-your-face kind of power you see in Verona, the power of violence. It's all about asserting dominance with a sword.
And who's the poster child for this? Oh, it has to be Tybalt. I mean, look at this line. It's literally one of the first things he says in the whole play. He doesn't just join a fight. He walks in and immediately introduces himself with a death threat. Talk about making an entrance.
So, what does this line actually tell us? Well, a ton, actually. Right away, we know Tybalt is this super aggressive, hot-headed guy. But more importantly, this line is a massive piece of foreshadowing. It's Shakespeare telling us, hey, in Verona, this is how they solve problems. Power isn't about words, it's proven with a sword.
And it doesn't stop there. Flash forward to the Capulet party. This is supposed to be a party, a time for peace, right? But the second Tybalt hears a Montague voice, what's his first instinct? Fetch me my rapier. It's like a reflex.
And that's the key, isn't it? For a guy like Tybalt, his power, his entire identity is wrapped up in his willingness to fight. Just hearing Romeo's voice feels like a personal attack on his status, and the only way he knows how to respond to is violence.
Now, here's a little something to really level up your essay. This wasn't just made up for the play. Shakespeare's audience would have known all about this stuff. There were actual riots in London, and Tybalt, he's a textbook example of what we call hegemonic masculinity. This cultural idea that being a real man meant being aggressive and dominant. Definitely drop that term in your analysis.
Okay, so we've covered power on the streets. But what about power behind closed doors? Now we're going to talk about the power of patriarchy, the absolute, unquestionable authority of men in this society.
And who's the king of this castle? Lord Capulet. Just look at this comparison. On one hand, he's shutting down his own nephew, Tybalt, basically saying, who's the boss here, me or you? But then he turns that same need for control on his own daughter, Juliet, and it is absolutely brutal. Hang the young baggage! I mean, wow! It shows his power in that house is total.
And it gets worse than just yelling. So much worse. This line, my fingers itch. It's short, it's sharp, and it is a direct threat of physical violence, from a father to his daughter. Chilling.
And this is so important to understand. He's not just losing his temper. This is a statement of ownership. He sees Juliet as his property, and when she disobeys, it's not just annoying, it's a direct challenge to his power. When it comes down to it, her freedom means absolutely nothing against his authority.
And here's your context point for this section. The Elizabethan audience would have totally gotten this. Their society was deeply, deeply patriarchal. Fathers legally had complete control over their wives and daughters. So in a way, Lord Capulet isn't just some random mean dad. He's acting out the power that his entire society told him he had.
So we've got violence in the streets, patriarchy in the home, but then a third power enters the scene. A force that's so revolutionary it threatens to burn the whole system down. And that, of course, is the all-consuming power of love.
Just listen to this. I will no longer be a Capulet. Can you imagine how radical this is? She's basically saying she's ready to throw away her name, her family, her entire identity, all for a boy she just met. This is pure rebellion against everything she's supposed to be.
So you see, love itself becomes a source of power here. It gives Juliet the strength to imagine a different life, a different self, one that isn't defined by her dad or by this stupid feud. It's a direct challenge to both the patriarchy and the violence that runs Verona.
And in the end, this power of love becomes absolute. It pushes them to the most extreme action possible. Romeo's love is so intense, so all-consuming, that living without Juliet isn't an option. His final act is dictated by that love.
And then Juliet, she follows him. But this isn't just a moment of despair. It's an act of power. She takes total control of her own destiny. She even calls the dagger happy. Why? Because for her, it's not a weapon of defeat. It's her way of taking charge, of reuniting with Romeo on her own terms. It's a tragic but powerful choice.
Of course, you can't talk about power in this play without mentioning these two big ones, religion and fate. You've got the friar trying to use his religious authority to guide and control them, and then you have the idea of fate, these star-crossed lovers hanging over everything, which really brings up a fascinating question for your essay. Is their love powerful enough to defy these forces, or is it just another pawn in fate's game?
Okay, time to wrap this up. We've looked at the power of violence, the power of patriarchy, and the power of love. So let's synthesize all this and figure out who really holds the power. This chart really lays it all out, doesn't it? You've got the power of violence, which comes from the family's feud, and its consequence, chaos and death. Then there's patriarchy, coming from Lord Capulet, which only leads to Juliet rebelling and deceiving him. And finally, love, coming from Romeo and Juliet themselves, which leads to defiance and their own tragic deaths. Notice a pattern here? Every single type of power in this play ends in destruction.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. It's a great one to wrestle with in your conclusion. Is the real tragedy of this play that love just wasn't strong enough to beat hate and society? Or is the tragedy that love was actually the most powerful and destructive force of them all? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.